on-the-scene reporter investigating rumors that the Beatles will be getting back together again in the near future. With me now is Alan Klein, controversial figure surrounding the Liverpool Four and their former manager. Mr. Klein, the four Beatles have been seen together at various times in the past few months in the United States. Do you think they will get back together again as a group?
I feel that I see it slowly melting.
If they do get together again, will you be their manager?
I don't know.
Mr. Klein, what is your advice for the Beatles? With me now is John Ono Lennon. John, how did you meet Yoko? Where is she now?
She's got a ticket to ride, and she don't care.
John, why did Yoko leave you?
She said that living with me was bringing her down, yeah.
Alan Klein, do you have any marital advice for John Lennon?
Hey, you've got to hide your love away.
John Lennon, what do you have to say about that?
Everybody's got something to hide, except for me and my love.
John, who are you currently going out with? Mr. Klein, what do you think of John's girlfriends? John, if you are deported from the United States, where will you go? Why?
I need a place to hide away.
With me now is George Harrison. George, what have you been doing since the breakup of the Beatles?
Fixing our home.
George, you've been in the U.S. for a long time. What did you say to the other guys when you saw them?
Hello.
Now that you're getting back into meditation, how is your spiritual being?
You know I feel alright.
George, what do you say to those who do not understand your meditation process?
Try to see it my way.
What are your plans for the future?
I need a job, so I want to be a back writer.
Here's Ringo. What do you think of George's meditation?
The little children laughing him behind his back.
Ringo, why is your voice hardly ever heard on Beatles recordings?
What would you think if I sang out at you?
The other Beatles have each done several solo albums. Why have you done only one?
No, it don't come easy.
Why didn't you write many of the songs on that album yourself?
I don't have much to say.
With me now is Paul McCartney, who is said to be the most articulate and eloquent Beatle. Paul, will Linda be performing with the Beatles?
Beep, 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 yeah.
What do you other Beatles say to that?
No, 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 no.
Paul, what have you been doing since the Beatles broke up?
You know I work all day.
What is it exactly that you do?
I'm the Eggman. I'm the woman.
Paul, if the Beatles do get together, what will happen to Wings?
There's a chance that we might fall apart. We all too long.
John, what do you think of Wings?
Oh, I never heard them at all.
Gentlemen, the question that everybody wants to know. Will the Beatles get back together? Paul?
Don't you know that you can count me out?
George?
We can work it out.
Ringo?
You won't see me.
John?
Right, you know it ain't easy.
If the Beatles do get back together again, you stand to make more money than any other musical artists in history. Gentlemen,
B-E-A-T-L-E, as in the bug? No, as in the group. As in the groupie. I think they wrote Star Baby about you. Male groupie.
Very interesting.
In the meantime, it's time to say good night, Goober and Chips, Rich and Brian Man. Good night, Paula and Budgie. Good night, Linda. Good night, Barb and Bob Dean and Jonathan Ross Crackers. Good night, Linda again. That's a different one. Good night, Ann Palmer, Ma Shywitz, Connie and Louie down in West Virginia.
Mountain music, you know what I mean? Very interesting.
Great to spend your honeymoon stepping on cow patties. Good night, Marie. Good night to the Munchkins. Good night, Bill, Weekend, Bob and Sharon. Good night, Round, Tom and Joanne. Good night, Ms. Crosby. Good night to the road. Ken and Elaine, Joe and Peggy, Alan, Jim, Dwayne, and Carl up at Track Monster Audio. Good night, Kim and Diane, Gary and Shar, Dave and Rhea, Pete and Rosie. Good night, Freddie from the Falls. Good night, Danny Marinucci. Good night, Danny, Mary, Tommy, and Freddie. Good night to the Simmons School of Embalming and Mortuary Science in Syracuse. Good night, Pesha Rosenholz, wherever you are.
Very interesting.
Good night, you. And remember, many disc jockeys are unmarried because they're radioactive.
Very interesting.
See you tomorrow night at 6.
Stupid.
Have a nice night. Ciao. People.
Well, good night, Don.
Good night, Don.
Good night, Don.
Buonanotte.
Bonsoir.
Good night, Don.
Good night, Don Berns, whatever you are.
good night, Don.
Until we meet again, Don. Peace. Good night, Irene.
Buonanotte, you fat slob.
Tonight, the part of the disc jockey was played by Don Berns. Phones answered by Don Ernst. Lighting by Matches. Directed by Jim Moran and Al Lafleur. Heavy Radio 50. named Bob McRae. Bob McRae went on after the Don Berns show on Friday night and saw a big sheet of paper with a whole bunch of scribbling on it, and Bob McRae threw it out.
Very interesting, but sneaky.
And Bob McRae threw out Don Berns' goodnight list. So Don Berns can't say goodnight to those people on goodnight list number 1A anymore. He's got to go to goodnight list number 5B and use that until he can remember who was on goodnight list number 1A. So Don Berns would like to say to Bob McRae and a few other things that he can't say on the radio, so he'll turn off the mic and he'll say
Very interesting.
in the meantime, good night, Goober and Chip, Rich and Brian Mann, Paula and Budgie, Barb and Bob Dean, Jonathan Ross Crackers, good night, Linda Ann Palmer, good night, Greg, Mosh Shywitz, Connie and Louie, good night, Marie. Oh, welcome back, Connie and Louie. Connie got his bowling shirt, Louie got his bowling shirt washed in West Virginia, I understand.
Mountain music, you know what I mean? Very interesting.
They were just married, you see. Connie doesn't do any housework. Good night to the Munchkins, good night, Bill, and Weekend, and Bob and Sharon, and Round and Tom and Joanne, good night, Ms. Crosby, good night to the Road, the original Road, Ken and Elaine, Joe and Peggy, Alan, Jim, Dwayne and Carl, Kim and Diane, good night, Gary and Shar, David and Rhea, Pete and Rosie, good night, Freddie from the Falls, Danny Marinucci, and good night, Danny and Mary and Tommy and Freddie in Warwick, Rhode Island, Donna, Mark and Avi, good night, Chris, Dale from Ann Simmons School of Embalming,
Very interesting.
and Mortuary Science in Syracuse. Good night, Pesha Rosenholtz, wherever you are, and good night, you.
Very interesting.
We'll see you tomorrow night at 6. Oh, goody. That's exactly what I say. Have a nice night. Ciao, people.
I see our time is running out.
Good night, little friends. Good night. I'll tune in again tomorrow at the same time, and I'll be back with all my little friends.
Gee, I wonder who that masked fella was.
I don't know, but he took my dolly.
2-hour McDonald's, including the one at 333 Meadow Drive in North Tonawanda. Just go ask him for one, right?
Very interesting, but sneaky.
Well, you know, no purchase necessary. The same thing goes for the June 8th Music to the People concert, the first one this summer, in the brand new Melody Fair Dome, starring Weekend, Junction West, and a couple of big surprises. It'll be well worth your while to get you a pizza by DeRose and pick up a free ticket for the Music to the People concert. Now, you can only get in with a ticket, so get them now. Get them fast. I don't have too many more to give away, so don't count on winning them here. Get over to Pizza by DeRose, pick them up, and we'll see you June 8th.
Very interesting.
For the Music to the People concert. Oh, that's going to be a good concert. Wait till you find out what surprise we got cooking for you. In the meantime, some of the records are wanted this evening on WKBW, provided free of charge by the manufacturers and distributors of those records. Good night, Goob and Chips, Rich and Brian, and Lisa, Paula and Budgie.
Mountain music, you know what I mean? Very interesting.
Well, they are. Barb and Wow.
Good night, Don Berns, whatever you are.
Good night, Don. Until we meet again, Don. Peace.
Good night, Irene.
What a nut there, you fat the slob.
Tonight, the part of the disc jockey was played by Don Berns. Phones answered by Bess Meyerson and the Teenage Tramp. Lighting by Matches, directed by Jim Adler and Bill Lipp. A Dr. and Mrs. Berns production.